Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for starting a bit later than programmed. Welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of Southwark Council. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm the chair of the committee. Just before we start the meeting, I've just got a few housekeeping announcements to make. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening, unless the fire brigade tells us different. If you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is at the St John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area. Please switch your phones, mobile phones to silent whilst in the meeting. The meeting is being live streamed to the Southwark Council YouTube channel. A recording of the meeting will also be viewable on YouTube once the meeting has concluded. May I remind members of the following. Firstly, when the chair speaks, other members should stop speaking and not interrupt the chair. Secondly, members must raise their hands when they wish to speak and wait to be called. Members can ask questions on the issue under discussion, and members can move recommendations also on the issue under discussion. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot, or tweet, or X, whatever it is nowadays, the public proceedings of the meeting, and the copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. So without further ado, I'll get on with the formal agenda. Firstly, apologies. I have received apologies from, not Councillor Leeming, Councillors Brown, Foster, and Johnson. I've also got apologies for lateness from Councillor Rose, and I have apologies from the two education co-op members, Jonathan Clay and Martin Brecknell. I don't think there's any other apologies for absence. Would voting members please introduce yourselves when I call your name? Obviously, I've introduced myself. Councillor von Wiese.
Good evening, Irina von Wiese. I'm Vice Chair and Councillor in Borough and Bankside.
Very much. Councillor Abacha.
Good evening, Councillor Susan Abacha.
Thank you. Councillor Browning.
Councillor Maggie Browning, Dulwich Hill Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Good evening, Victor Chamberlain from Borough and Bankside.
Very much. Councillor Emmanuel.
Good evening, Councillor Sabina Emmanuel, Peckham Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Leeming.
Councillor Richard Leeming, Dulwich Village Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Nunes.
Councillor Morgan Nunes, Village.
And last but not least, Councillor Seaton.
Councillor Martin Seaton, North Warwick Ward. Thank you, Chair.
My pleasure. Yes. Yes, sorry, just to remind you all, please keep the microphones as close to you as possible so it can be picked up for recording. Otherwise, we'll have complaints, nobody can hear you. Heaven forfend. Okay, so let's move on to item 2, which is notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. There are no additional late items as such, but we've got 4 supplemental papers, I believe. So we have contained in supplemental number 1, relates to item 5, the Southwark Community Safety Partnership Priorities and Refresh Plan. And also we have in there the appendices 1 to 5. I'm not going to read out all the names, but they're all there. Contained in supplemental number 2 is a summary note relating to item 6, Statement of Community Involvement and Development Consultation Charter, which is on the main agenda. Contained in supplemental 3 is appendix 3, the Scrutiny Improvement Review Actions Log, which forms part of item 7 on the agenda. And finally, supplemental number 4 is the presentation we're going to receive from the Southwark Community Safety Partnership. 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare an interest or dispensation in respect of any item on the agenda? No. Thank you very much. Minutes, item 4. The minutes for the meeting held on the 27th of November are still in preparation will therefore need to be submitted to the next meeting for approval. Note that? Noted. Thank you very much. Item 5, Southwark Community Safety Partnership Priorities and Refresh Plan, Supplemental Agenda Number 1. For this item, they're very keen to get to the table. We have Councillor Natasha Ennin, the Cabinet Member for Community Safety, who will be presenting the report on the Southwark Community Safety Partnership, supported by Stephen Douglas, the Director of Stronger Neighbourhoods. Is Tony speaking on this one? No? Okay, fair enough. And Caroline is speaking on this one? No? Okay, fine. Also in attendance, I believe we've got members of the Community Safety Partnership. So we've got Detective Chief Superintendent Seb Ajay. Are you here? Yes, there he is. Don't recognise you out of uniform, you see. Emma Connor, is she here? Yes. Do you want to come forward? Thank you. Darren Summers, yes, please come forward. It saves me having to call you up one by one. People are sick of the sound of my voice at the best of times. And is Daniel Capen? Yeah. Right, so we've got the full team. Yeah. Good. The format for this item will be for the committee to hear from the Community Safety Partnership with an initial presentation, council officers on the latest position in respect of community safety and information on the development of the upcoming strategy, be followed by a question and answer session to members of the Community Safety Partnership. So, without further ado, I think we can invite you to give the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Before the presentation, I was just going to do a brief introduction. So the Community Partnership is chaired by myself and the Borough Commander. It brings together the police, the local authority, fire and rescue services, health and probation to ensure we work collaboratively. The top priority for our residents is about making the borough safe. The partnership is a legal duty to develop and implement strategies that address crime, disorder, and antisocial behaviour in our borough, reduce reoffending, reduce violence, and prevent people from becoming involved in serious violence. To do this effectively, we set clear evidence-based annual priorities informed by data from the Strategic Needs Assessment. So the current position is that we're updating our priorities for the next financial year and 2025 to 30 is the partnership plan. The process is shaped by the latest approved needs assessment from the data from 2023-2024 and sets out the insights and progress from the past year. As many of you know, the LGA peer review recognised that we're very innovative in the community safety partnership space. Nonetheless, we still recognise that our residents have been very clear that antisocial behaviour and safety at night is a key concern. And also that the feelings of not feeling safe at night is something that's slightly higher than the London average. So what we're doing today is really bringing forward that annual strategic plan for you to be able to contribute to that. So the key focus is on our approach, which is data-led and is responsive to the emerging trends. And what we're going to be talking to you about today is our current priorities, progress made, and key findings from 2023-24, the Strategic Needs Assessment. It highlights the broader factors that influence the community safety partnership work, such as the community safety review, which we've touched upon in a cabinet paper in December, which sets out a new way of working, focusing on cross-council working, looking at the community safety partnership and if we can do things differently, as well as working with our external partners. On that note, I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, the Borough Commander.
Thank you, Natasha. So my name's Seb Agiado. Detective Chief Superintendent for the MPS, and I've been BCU Commander for Lambeth and Southwark for the last 2 years. I think the Southwark Community Safety Partnership is, and I work also with Lambeth, I think it's really, really innovative in terms of the way it looks at things through a data lens, and looks quite panoramic in terms of solutions and innovations. We have a really challenging context, so we are well and truly out of the COVID lockdown space. So I think last COVID lockdown was around March 2021. We've seen a huge amount of success in terms of Southwark being a vibrant place for many people to travel into, and work in, and also in terms of the nighttime economy as well. Sadly, with that, it brings criminality and opportunity for those who, particularly around acquisitive crime. So we face those huge challenges in terms of that. But I'm really pleased in terms of the approach we have against a really challenging context. And for me, it's a continuing dialogue with our local communities, our elected representatives, to make sure we're doing the right things that you want us to do. But for me, it's just continuing in terms of that innovation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does any other member of the partnership want to speak this juncture, or Stephen?
Should I just take you through the presentation, Chair?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so you've all seen the presentation, so I won't go through every word on the slides. The first of those, sorry, it's a little slow. So this just really sets the context, and some of this has been touched on. Community safety partnerships nationally are statutory, so we're required to do this. Crime and Disorder Act sets out who those partners are. See those represented in this evening. So local authorities, police, fire and rescue, probation services and health services locally. And there will be an opportunity later for you to ask questions about those partners. What the legislation also requires of us is the process that we're now at the beginning of, is to produce a partnership plan for how we will deal with disorder issues in the partnerships area, and to use a strategic assessment, and there's a summary of that in the paper theme, to inform that plan. That strategic assessment is an exercise that we do annually, so I'll talk a little bit about some of that. So it's very much evidence-based, as Ellen said. It also, whilst it's a partnership plan, that there are elements of it, and I'll touch on this a bit more later, that relate very closely to the individual plans and strategies of each of those patients. So Southwark 2030, a safer Southwark, resonates very closely with the priorities the partnership have from the council's perspective. The CSP is also part of this broader landscape of statutory partnerships. And they do interlink. There are issues that each of those partnerships looks at. And a very good example of that is the partnership, which is a relatively new thing. It, of course, leads for the CSP on the current priority of reducing drug use, which is very significant, as it is elsewhere. So that's just a little bit about the to what the statutory partnership is all about. Just in terms of some highlights, as part of this process is looking back at what's achieved in the previous year, and how that informs moving forward. There are currently 5 priorities. The first of those is tackling violence against women and girls and promoting safety. And there are some highlights of that activity. The slide there, that includes things like and safety charter, awareness campaigns like Through Our Eyes, which was targeted at young men. That's had well over 1 million views on social media, been used in schools.
Could you get just a bit closer to the microphone, Stephen? I'm sorry.
Both in Southwark and elsewhere to tackle misogyny. The second priority is reducing and preventing violence and vulnerability. Of course, the fairly recent change is that we now have the serious violence duty. So there's another statutory duty on partners to work together to tackle serious violence. And just picking out a couple of things on the slide, our young advisors, many of you will have met Southwark young advisors, have done some great work training police. And in terms of the support on youth violence, our local violence reduction unit, Community Harm and Exploitation Hub, has worked with over 100 young people. And at the moment, 100% of those have not reoffended within 6 months. Third priority I'll touch on is reducing drug-related harm. As I say, the Combating Drugs Partnership is oversees that for the Community Safety Partnership, and that reinforces the link between community safety and health. That works as well as on enforcement and intervention on things like improving access to the treatment service. So world-class treatment service is one of the legs of the National Drugs Strategy, which drives the activity of that partnership. The fourth is really important locally and is about increasing trust and confidence in policing. So a number of elements of that. The police locally have a trust and confidence plan that came out of things like the Casey report. We recently established a Southwark Policing Oversight Board that Motley has oversight of that plan and is the first of its kind in London. And the last one I'll pick out there is Youth Independent Advisory Group. Engaged almost 1,000 young people in workshops and training about things like stop and search, youth, and so on. And the final current priority is called Creating Safe and Sociable Estates and Neighbourhoods. That includes antisocial behaviour. We just picked out some highlights there, including the significant investment in CCTV and the Warden's Task Force. So that's just a look back at current priorities. Just in terms of what the assessment so far, and as I say, we're at early stages of this, tells us, in relation to crime and disorder, in the period that the data looks at, that saw an increase in Southwark slightly higher than the increase across London. Has already been touched on. That increase is driven by a significant increase in theft incidents. So if you look at the total volume of reported crime in the borough, theft of various kinds, theft, robbery, and kinds of acquisitive crime, well over 50% of the total. And in Southwark and in most of burglary has decreased slightly, so some good news there. In terms of hate crime, issues with some of this are that some of these crimes are very underreported. That's remained consistent. The first pillar of the assessment. The second is to do with tackling violence against women and girls and promoting safety. We've seen VORG-related offending, reports of that increasing, and driven by an increase in sexual offences, exposure, and terrorism. Domestic abuse offence reporting declining in this period, We haven't yet got underneath why that is, and that may be to do with willingness to the third section on this slide is to do with violence and mobility. In the period we're looking at here, violence against the person increased, driven by violence without injury offences. We did also see an increase in serious violence and a slight increase in knife-related offences. And we may come back to this in questions, also an increase in gun crime offences and in personal robbery. So Southwark, this period being the second highest in London, personal robbery. Presentation has stuck. These are the technology. So I'll move on without moving the slides forward. Moving on to the next slide, in relation to drug-related offences, total drug offences fell in the period we're talking about. Drug trafficking offences increased. Some of these reports are to do with or possibly driven by police activity. So whether it's buying drugs or weapons, then you will see increases in those sorts of offences. In terms of trust and confidence, that has continued to levels of trust in particular communities are very low in Southwark, and with where they are particularly low. So with Black Londoners, with women less likely the police, with white residents less likely to be to a low question. Finally, on safe and sociable estates and neighbourhoods, the police received something over 9,000 ASB complaints. That was a 20% decrease from 2022. We did tend to see reports of ASB increasing during the pandemic lockdown, of people spending more time at home and so on from neighbours, but that decreased in this period. And overall, Southwark ranking 8th highest for ASP report in London, and the council received just under 3,000.
Sorry, Stephen, you get to the microphone a bit more. Sorry.
Apologies. So the final slide, and apologies I can't make this move on, just sets out the timeline. As I touched on earlier, we're at an early stage in the process. So on the 5th of February, that strategic assessment was reviewed by the Community Safety Partnership. 12th of February, we're here for your input to the process and to inform the final production of the strategy. Between February and April, we go through a period of stakeholder engagement and of establishing the priorities. It's now moving on its own. And then in Q2 of 25 to 26, final sign-off. So there is an opportunity to bring a draft strategy back to scrutiny, if you'd like to see that and further development sign-off. As I said earlier, all of the partners are here. Questions.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, unless any of the partners want to add anything specifically in their area on top of what's been said, we'll move to questions. Is that okay? Good. Okay, before I bring other members in, I'll take advantage of my position. Just going back to what the borough commander said, which I thought was very interesting, to say that the partnership here is innovative, and you mentioned about it being very sort of data driven and Stephen says evidence based. I just wondered if there were any other particular aspects or characteristics of the way it's shaped here, which is different. Not just Lambeth, because I don't want to pick on Lambeth all the time, but anywhere else in the Met area.
Thank you, Councillor. So one of the key priorities for me, and it's typified in terms of the way the presentation was laid out, Borg-related offences, it's an epidemic throughout the country. And it needed to be a top priority. It needed to be something particularly for the Met to address. So you see in a lot of in terms of the way we've listed the priorities, it's number one. In a lot of the work we've been doing, particularly both in terms of domestic abuse, rape and serious sexual offences, but also sexual offences in public spaces. We've put a lot of emphasis in terms of how do we address that? How do we build that confidence amongst women and girls in our communities? And I make no apology that in terms of priorities, that has to be a top priority for us. But I think that's a key way in terms of the way that the partnership has been working.
Great. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Okay, I've got Councillor Browning and then Councillor Newman.
Thank you very much for the presentation. A question for the Cabinet Member and I think the Borough Commander. Just the Casey review was mentioned in the presentation and the building of trust and confidence in the police. Could you say a bit more how the findings of the Casey review have really shaped your work on this, including the Police Oversight Board, which I know is very, I really welcome it in terms of being the only example of that in London. So if you could say a bit more about the Casey review and how it's shaped this work. Thank you.
Thank you. So when I started my tenure as BCU Commander for Lambeth and Southwark, I think a few weeks or months later that the Casey report came out. I'll be honest, the findings were quite horrific. They were a real wake-up call for policing, not just in London, but throughout the country. I think one of the key tenets of her report that we needed to, as an organisation, really address was the fact that the Met, for whatever reason, we moved away from localism and community policing. A lot of the decision making was done centrally, and it kind of missed out that local engagement and stakeholder feel. So one of the things we've been quite keen on locally is how can we make sure that there's that dialogue, that formalised dialogue around police activity and what impact it's having in our communities. And what we've done, Natasha's been the key driver for that. We have set up an oversight and scrutiny committee, which and again, we talk about innovation. You're not getting this in any other London borough. It's not this kind of setup with the kind of heft that's been applied to it. And in terms of that particular committee, it's looking at policing in Southwark, and it's being quite critical friend to say, actually, what are you doing? What's the impact it's having? How effective is it going to be? I think it's a second meeting so far, so it's still in its early days. But my vision of that is eventually we reach a stage where that committee is really driving police activity. It's that close to police decision making, and I think that addresses Casey fundamentally. That need to actually have a local feel, local engagement, local stakeholder involvement, and move away from what we were doing before, which is very centralised, very much focused around New Scotland Yard.
Yes, I'm sure there was something to do with who was occupying the mayoral seat at the time. But anyway, Councillor Hayden.
Over the last year, it's been really, really important to ensure that residents feel that their voices are heard, especially when it comes to policing. The Borough Commander has touched on local accountability, and that was at the heart of what we were doing. What's been really important for us is making sure that we're not seeing the same stakeholders on the Policing Oversight Board. So what we've done is specifically set it up so that the board members are not on, say, for example, the Independent Advisory Group or the Safer Neighbourhood Board. So we've got diverse representation in terms of age, gender, and ethnicity. In regards to the Casey review specifically, we've taken the three priorities for the new Met for London: less crime, more trust, high standards. And what that board is doing at the moment is focusing on those priority areas, really holding the police to account on their trust and accountability plan, because trust and confidence plan. So, for example, at the first board meeting, one of the things we flagged up to the police was, you've given us a system that has all these RAG ratings on them. How do we know that you've actually done this work? So yesterday we had our first board meeting, and it was like, tell us how you've done this. How do your priorities align with what the residents say are important? What are we doing around our VORG work? And for me, what it does more than anything is it puts residents at the heart of holding the police to account in a different way. Because at the moment, in many instances, we've been pushing for the police to be more visible at Scrutiny in this instance, because the Community Safety Partnership hadn't even been here since 2021, and they've always obliged. And it's been very important that we don't only look at the Met, because, you know, community safety is everybody's business. But when it comes to trust and confidence in the police in particular, there's some groups that we need to ensure that their voices are heard, and it's more diverse than the current crop of people that we see. And just making sure that accountability on a local level is reflective of the needs of our communities, especially around antisocial behaviour, which I'm going to put Seb on the spot in some ways, because it's not part of the policing agenda, but it's something that comes through our doors all the time. And I know that when we're talking about antisocial behaviour in our nighttime economy area, some of that is VORG. And if women don't feel that when issues are happening in our nighttime economy area, and sometimes outside of that, then it's very difficult to hold the police to account. So I'm going to push that back to Seb in regards to the VORG and your new Met for London. I'm sorry, ASB.
Thank you. So one of the examples I think that illustrates localism, local power influencing police decision making, because that's what it boils down to, is Peckham Pulse. So we know that that particular area for a period of time, there's been ASB, it's drug related, it features in terms of sex work and other stuff that affects the residents, the businesses of that particular area. So we've had those conversations, we've had that input from local authorities, and we have, well, I've made the decision to invest in a team that's exclusive for that area. So we're now currently recruiting a group of officers from our dwindling resources to just focus on Peckham Pulse. So that gives you an example of where we're now listening 100% to our local authority partners, and it's affecting directly our policing decision and operational decisions.
Okay, great. I've got Councillor News. So.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work you're doing in the excellent report. I wanted to ask a couple of general questions, though. First of all, you say that there is an epidemic of violence against women and girls nationally. Do you think, that's probably maybe difficult to answer, but do you think that is a situation that's come about as a result of people being more inclined to report? Or do you think that it is a result of, as we see, malign forces coming through social media, through the likes of, I don't want to mention individuals, but we know people who have been in house arrest in various places, etc. I have a son my son is in his early 20s. I have this feedback from him, luckily not in the way that's influencing him, but his concerns about it is the way it influences others. So that's on violence against women and girls. I also picked up in the presentation that you gave that we in Southwark have the highest levels of personal robbery in London. This is an issue which is a particular concern as a councillor for Dulwich Village Ward, where we have a real problem with this, I think. To be fair, or to be clear, I've been a councillor since 2018, and some of the first meetings that I was involved with as a councillor back then were in relation to school children being robbed for their phones. And we know that, historically, again, having a son then in his teenage years and very, very sort of familiar with the curve of the way these things ebb and flows. But we are seeing a huge increase now. We know that we're getting cases of more adults also having their phones nicked. We have cases of a little bit more violence being involved on occasion as well. Why is it, do you think, that we are the we have the second worst rates? I mean, I'm interested where the most cases are being reported, but I'd be interested why you think we obviously are faring quite poorly on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So two very, very meaty topics there. I'll tackle the first one around Borg and my opinions on that. And it's not simple. These things are never simple. They're always quite complex. But you're absolutely right that the social media space and the technological space has accelerated, I think, misogyny and Borg-related offences. So one of the things you've seen in terms of policing, we used to have child sexual exploitation teams, and pretty much they were dealing with child exploitation in the physical space. We've had to go ahead of the curve, and we now have online child sexual abuse and exploitation teams that are dedicated to the kind of indecent images that are perpetrated online. A lot of it's international, really complex paedophile rings. We've had to adjust our policing approach and the sophistication in terms of technology to tackle that level of abuse. So I think that the technological space is one thing we're seeing. And I just think there's just a general undercurrent in society at the moment where it's become, I think, too acceptable in terms of Borg, and that's something that we need to address. And we're seeing that in the kind of offences that are happening. So you're right on both points. It's technological, and I do think there's a societal undercurrent as well that we're seeing at the moment. I've got a daughter, and I'm frightened in terms of she's just a teenage girl. I'm frightened in terms of what she's going to be exposed to. And so it really resonates with me in terms of being a parent, that we need to have an effective police force that addresses that. The second one around robbery, what I would say with robbery at the moment is, so we have a unique issue here. So the number one area would be Westminster, and we would be maybe second or third. But the key underlying feature of that is the blossoming nighttime economy. We have massive transport hubs, London Bridge being one of them, and it's that northwest quadrant of the borough. That's where we see the uniqueness in terms of robbery offences. So if you took that away, and areas like Dulwich, we would probably be a middle of the road borough. But when you add that takes us way above the curve. So I was at a Better Bankside event today, and what comes across from there is that it's not just a policing solution. It's about the bids, about local authorities. It's about fire service, about all different agencies coming together to tackle this quite complex issue. So I know the figures are not where we need them to be, but I'm absolutely confident with that kind of joined up approach, we'll get to grips with it. I think there's also a space where we need to be really challenging as partners of each other. So for me, a huge amount of work needs to go in relation to prevention. I don't think it's acceptable anymore where people come out of nightclubs in the middle of the night with their mobile phones, quite obvious for people. I think we need to really target hard on that. That there's a question around licensing premises and what advice and awareness they give to people. It's just, I think the more we target hard and the more we make members of the public aware, the harder we make it for people to exploit the opportunity of stealing people's mobile phones. In addition to that, I need to prioritise as a BCU commander policing of that area. So we are taking, and it's difficult because If you're going to put loads of police officers into that quadrant, then Dulwich, what happens with Dulwich and the schoolboy robberies there? But that's something that we need to drill down these numbers in terms of robbery. And if we need to make those decisions, that's something we need to do.
I think that's a very valid point. I saw something on social media yesterday where there was a young woman on the phone on the tube, and the doors were just about to close, and a young man just reached inside, picked the phone, doors closed, and away he went. So there's a lot of that in Southwark because of the Elephant, London Bridge, etc., major termini in the borough. So it's bound to distort the figures, as you quite rightly say. Doesn't lessen it, but obviously exaggerates it to an extent. Councillor von Wiese.
Thank you very much, and I would also like to extend deep gratitude to both Councillor and the Borough Commander for their work, and indeed for the Community Safety Partnership, which I feel very hopeful about. My question is specifically about community wardens, which we know, at least from my experience in my ward, they are extremely popular with our residents. We don't have very many of them. I believe at the moment it's only 32 for the entire borough. So my question is, A, do you see that there is any correlation between the number of community wardens and the success rate in combating crime, and which, if so, which one of these different types of crime are particularly affected, if you do have that data, particularly with regards to violence and personal robbery? Are community wardens effective? And then secondly, again, with regard to community wardens, when you're looking at trust and confidence policing, I'm really continues to decline. This is not something that we see with community wardens. We have lots of people that say, yeah, we don't like the police, but the community wardens, we know them. They know us. They're local, and we trust them. So is there a different trend maybe with community wardens? And if so, would that in some way influence your policy going forward and maybe invest in more community wardens? Thank you.
Thank you. The community wardens are definitely a valuable asset, and they continue to grow and improve. When they were first established in 2002, they were about a visible presence. Things have slightly changed now. They've been doing the educate and engage, and I've been out with them and I've seen the fantastic work they do. Borough and Bankside, London Bridge, the empathy and the things that they see, carrying the pens to support people who are afflicted by drug usage, making sure that they're offering support, going around with nurses to help our rough sleeping population, but also being a protective force. As you know, there's been significant investment into the community wardens that has led to an uplift. They now have body-worn cameras, so in the case of an emergency, this can be used for prosecutions. So they're an invaluable source. The thing is, they don't have the expertise and training of the police. And for me, it's very important that they don't cross over into that realm. The Community Safety Partnership, as you know, is governed by legislation, the Crime, Policing and Sentencing Act. And what that does, it sets out that reducing crime is everybody's responsibility. And that's why we're here today with partners. So in my view, the community wardens are a small part of that. They're important, but there are things that the police must attend to, and that's the matters of crime. How they can support that is with the cameras. As you know, we've set out in the cabinet paper, we're looking at enforcement, and we're hoping that with some of the street crime in particular on our estates, that our community wardens will play a bigger role because of that local trust, that accountability, that flexibility in being able to be on the ground. I don't want to speak for the police in terms of the declining trust and confidence, but with anything, if what you're putting in the media is constantly negative, then that will also influence people's perceptions somewhat. And we shouldn't forget the fantastic work that the police do. They are running towards things that many people are running away from, and they do this on a daily basis. And I don't think our wardens will be in a position to take on that role. They just don't have the training to that level. In regards to some of the communities, as you can clearly see, I'm a member from an ethnic minority community. There's a disproportionality that we can't shy away from. We must be candid about what those disproportionalities are, which is disproportionately victims, but also disproportionately perpetrators in some instances. Now, it's really important that when we think about it from a Southwark Council perspective, that we're talking about that strand of work through Southwark Stands Together. So making sure that those stop and searches are based on intelligence, they're not emotive. Because, I mean, in urban areas, young people dress quite similar, but they may be distinctive in their behaviour and character. So that must stand out. Nonetheless, there's important work that has to be done. And I think that the work that sits in the realm of the police should remain in the realm of the police. And the work that sits in the world of our community safety wardens should grow and expand in line with the issues, but recognising that they're there to really support our communities. And like I said, enforcement will be the new way forward. I'm going to hand over to Stephen.
I just perhaps add very briefly to that response two things. Councillor Ennan touched on engagement there. That does include in hotspot areas for particular kinds of crime, crime prevention advice, things like mobile phone parking together with his colleagues who've done a fair bit of that. And also in terms of data, I mean, that off the top of my head, but where there have been operations that have involved wardens and CCTV. We have data on intelligence reports, where those intelligence reports led to arrests, those sorts of things. So we are tracking that. Examples of where that approach has worked. It's very hard stuff to do, using things like their body video and linking in with CCTV.
But just for my own information, how does mobile phone marking work? Very briefly summarize it, and it sounds like it's a potential solution that's not working about it.
This is where there is an invisible mark on the phone that can be seen under ultraviolet light, and will tie that phone back to its owner. So it's used quite commonly. It's used on bicycles and similar sort.
Very much. I've got 4 councillors. I've got Councillor Seaton first.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Councillor and colleagues here for the report. It's very detailed and very welcome. I want to thank you all for that. It's really very helpful. I'm going to try and avoid repeating questions been asked, but I will just ask a question on the violence against women and girls. What I'm particularly interested in is whether or not the strategy that's been laid out in this document, how does it relate to the neighbouring boroughs? And is there a strategic pan-London view on the subject that then has been being sorted down to this level? And if that's so, maybe you could refer us to a document. I'm that kind of guy. If you refer us to it, it'd be very useful to understand what the strategic pan-London document says, and how that relates to this document. And I'm also, Chair, as a prelim, interested how that relates to the Council 2030 document, which sets out the safer communities. So that's a broad context. But what I want to do in that case is just move on to the area of drugs and its prevalence within the community. And first of all, I want to recognise it's a difficult one. I recognise a difficult one. But I'm trying to gain from this document the examples in Glasgow and other places that the prevalence of drug taking and supply is both a responsibility of both the police, detecting and responding to, the council, setting up support services, and of course the NHS. Are the NHS here? Oh, they are here. Right, good. Just want to understand in that case how the strategy that was in the previous document, is that strategy being repeated in this document? I haven't read the previous document. It appears to be the same. And I'm trying to work out whether or not what's here will be effective and will reduce the number of those who are taking drugs. It will also reduce the supply of drugs, and of course respond to the Council 2030 strategy that we want to ensure this is a safer borough. But it does appear to be the same words almost for the previous document I've read, and therefore will this be effective? And is the borough commander and colleagues here convinced that this will be an effective response to what is a issue that both affects London, but particularly affects Southwark? An assessment of what you've written there. I want to understand, will this be effective and will this reduce the level of drug taking and also enable us to detect those who are supplying drugs in this borough?
The first question, the Pan London document is the Mayor's Policing and Crime Plan for London. That is being refreshed at the moment. That is being consulted on. But of course, there are a whole range of mechanisms by which people come together across London. So London Heads of Community Safety meet, Community Safety Partnership chairs meet, Pan London, to share good practice issues. There are also MOPAC and Violence Reduction Unit bring together people around issues like robbery, which is a Pan issue. So how do we tackle that together across London? So lots of mechanisms there. We do also work with neighbouring boroughs where in relation to that drugs point, what you see in the report is a summary of what was in the strategy last time round and the data that informs what we do next. So there is, which is a subset of our community safety strategy, a Southwark Drugs Action Plan, which the Combating Drug Partnership produces and refreshes on basis. It's a long discussion document. There is some evidence in the monitoring of the activity that organization, that partnership is taking, is having some impact in terms of the treatment system, those sorts of hard stuff to do. There's also lots of data on actions and things like that. Links policing and enforcement with quicker access into the treatment system.
I'll just add to in terms of Project Adder. So I think the question to me was, do I have confidence?
Yes.
I say absolutely. And the reason for that is principally Project Adder. So drugs, it's a market. Like any market, there's demand and there's if you just tackle the supply, then the demand's still there. You'll make no impact. If you just tackle the demand, you'll still have suppliers find other routes. At the moment, we're dealing with synthetic drugs such as fentanyl, nitazines, really potent drugs that are in the market. So what Project Adder, as Stephen says, it attacks both sides. It says for those who are using drugs, actually, can we provide treatment? Can we deal with it as a public health issue? Can we support you? And that's absolutely vital. And for the supply stuff, let's not all the time tackle young boys on the street corners who are very low down the train. Let's go middle tier. Let's have real impact in terms of those that are shipping drugs into the community, like in Southwark. So I think that kind of holistic approach, I'm confident on. I don't want that focus on we used to just stop search kids on street corners, and that was the dominance. And we used to just find cannabis. That's, for me, that's just a wasted approach. We need to hit higher tiers, and you can see that there's work at the moment with the National Crime Agency, our specialist crime units in the Met, and that feeds all the way down to the local level. And I think that's a holistic approach, the way we tackle drugs.
I mean, to my mind, I think there's like two tiers to this. There's on the illegal trade, if you like. But on the Southwark level, if I could also put there's general substance abuse, not just drugs, but alcohol as well. And particularly my patch, Camberwell, we've got the hospital as Kings, and there's a prevalence of street drinkers along really at the Harbour Lane and Camberwell Green. It's been there since before I was even elected to the council. So it's a persistent problem, but it's something which is very visible in the public's eye, and it's they regularly comment about. So it takes a collective effort to get to the. I know Councillor Stephen's starting to get back, so please go ahead.
I'm very interested to hear from the NHS. Of course, this is the example in Glasgow, and I've been able to read that paper, that treating particularly those who are taking drugs not as a criminal, but as a person with medical or psychological conditions. Okay, that holistic approach, to use your word, is what I'm really keen to understand. How is it effective here in Southwark? And only the NHS and other similar colleagues can tell us. Oh, there you are.
Well, just a couple of things really. So, right, principle the NHS treat people, and that's the service that the NHS in Southwark and the various bits of the NHS will treat people with a range of substance misuse issues in a variety of settings. But actually, the main specialist drugs treatment provider in Southwark is an organisation called Change Grow Live. It's called Change Grow Live, or CGL, which is the main drugs treatment provider in Southwark. And so that's third sector charitable organisation.
Are they based on premises in Southwark, or they're just a provider generally?
Well, Stephen probably's got more details. I mean, they're a provider across the country, and they provide drug services across a number of bases.
They do extensive outreach in Southwark, but also have 2 physical locations that they. But as was said, they work across other areas as well, and they are commissioned through Darren's team to provide that service for Southwark.
All locations, are they? Yes, yeah, I thought so. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to pick up the point about connectivity with Southwark 2030. So yes, I can assure that there is connectivity, so because both the plan, the priorities, and the Southwark 2030 have been driven by data and also by resident insight. So for Southwark 2030, the 3 key priorities are tackling ASB and crime, particularly hotspots, reducing violence against women, children and young people, and improving trust and confidence. And you've heard all of those things being spoken about this evening. So whilst they're not exactly the same as you would expect they wouldn't be, they are aligned so that it forms one common theme about PSP in Southwark.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for an excellent report and presentation so far. I was going to make one quick observation and then 2 quite different questions. First observation is I'm very glad to see the emphasis on Borg. This young woman I know who lives in the ward I represent suffered a spiking attack at university outside London, had to take a year off university, and yeah, so that shows the impact this sort of thing can have on young people. But the first question is, I know the emphasis on CCTV, it's something that residents in Dulwich Bridge are often asking for, so I'd like to ask about how you choose which areas to invest in, and what the effectiveness is of CCTV, given as I think it was you, Councillor, and hinted, people often go around looking the same, and I know, having a teenage daughter myself, that often includes a all-encompassing hood and possibly a scarf, so it can be quite hard to tell people apart. So what is the effectiveness of CCTV? And then I want to ask a quite different question. And I know that road safety and road violence doesn't appear in the strategy at all. Now, this isn't me just banging my drum, but it is slightly me banging my drum, in that there is anecdotal evidence to suggest that the poor driving or bad driving is increasing. Speed limits are being broken, bad parking, whatever. There's also, this is something that does impact on everybody in our borough, whether they're vulnerable or not, but increasingly young people and old people who are victims of road violence. But there's evidence that when you stop someone who's driving badly, that is a good opportunity to uncover people who have committed or are going to commit much more serious crimes, especially around antisocial behaviour. So I'd like to dig into why there isn't any mention at all of dealing with road violence in this strategy.
It's funny. First, really sorry to hear about the Vorg offence that was committed against a young lady, and just to provide some reassurance that as part of the work that we're doing around the women's safety Vorg transformation piece, we'll be issuing spiking kits to our licensed premises and making sure they're trained up on how to use that. And we'll continue to do ongoing work with men. Last year, White Ribbon Day started off with It Starts With Men. So a lot of the work that we're doing is focusing on working with young men and healthy relationships. In regards to CCTV cameras, I want to come back to one thing which was kind of missed off with Councillor Seaton's, the response to Councillor Seaton. We've talked about drug usage from the perspective of the person who's using it, and we've got the national drug strategy that focuses on the drug users. We talked about it from the commission service perspective, but I want to bring it back to the residents, people who live in some of our estates and some of our roads, that have off the street properties where there are people who are using drugs, burglaring, robbing properties, and also some of the inconveniences that come with that. I think that some of that resource needs to be dedicated towards actually moving some of this behaviour away from where some of our families live. And we shouldn't forget the impact that it has on residents when they're having to go through some of these issues around people defecating in buildings. Is something that I commonly hear. Seeing people shooting up in stairs. I've heard parents telling me that they're trying to take a different route, but what if there's only one way in and one way out, which is both being occupied? And I mention this in relation to CCTV cameras because it's often in these instances that we're hearing of a request for CCTV cameras. Now, from my perspective as a cabinet member, people see this as a valid deterrent. And in some instances it is, but in others it's not. So the ways to go about that is to actually report. So the frequency of reporting crime or ASB in particular will influence that. The Community Safety Partnership is a body which meets quarterly, but there are regular partnership tasking groups that happen monthly. There are tactical tasking coordination groups that take place where it's looking at met resourcing. So it really depends on what the issue is and the frequency. In some instances, they don't work. I'll give you an example. We did a pilot on the Lordship Lane and Bermondsey Street. And this was a demand from some businesses saying that, there was CCTV camera in these two locations, that it would have an influence on retail theft going down. Actually, we did it as a pilot in two locations in different parts of the borough. The camera was accessed once by the Met, and in the case of Lordship Lane, 3 times. This is not an effective use of a redeployable camera. However, if that was a hotspot area, which Stephen has made mention of, and the community wardens have been there, and we know that there's a persistent problem and we actually want to monitor that, that would be a good use of a redeployable camera. So I've gone a long-winded way because I wanted to make my point about drug usage and the impact for people who live in those areas or work in those areas in terms of aggressive and persistent begging and all the other things that spiral off of that, in addition to what was said. Thank you.
Okay.
That was a very good answer on CCTV. And I mean, of course, there are examples where it has been highly effective in a whole range of ways, including providing very good evidence to police that's prosecutions, in directing emergency services to accidents, at a very early stage. The East Street incident is a perfect example of that. But you're absolutely right that in those situations where somebody has a heart, a balaclava, or whatever, it's but where we put cameras based on very detailed crime and behaviour parts of the borough, do that analysis. Do have some to urging issues in places. It's a useful tool, but it's not panacea for dealing with crime. Road safety issues. The focus of this is crime and disorder, but different kind of command. Some of it, but.
Thank you for your points around vehicle crime. I'll go back to. I am going to go back to your point around CCTV. I think it lends itself to, I think, a useful point around the partnership and innovation. So one of the things that we've been doing as a partnership, particularly local police, is the deployment of live facial recognition. So this is a technology where it can detect people that, we, the police, really ought to know what they're getting up to. And one example, one deployment on our BCU, you had a registered sex offender who was walking in a public space with a 6-year-old child, arm in arm with a 6-year-old child. It wasn't their child. We believe it was that the mother was someone that they were grooming so they could have unescorted access with the 6-year-old child. If it wasn't for the live facial recognition picking up that registered sex offender, we would not have been able to arrest that person. And that person was charged for breach of sexual harm prevention order. And we were able to safeguard that child. That's just off that deployment. So for me, that's where we need to be really innovative as a partnership, using technology, using it responsibly, because there is concerns in terms of civil liberties. But for me, that's absolutely the way we need to, particularly around our big transport hubs. That's for me a really important example of how we use innovation. In relation to vehicle crime, you're absolutely right to say. So what we do periodically across London, we do something called ANPR operations. So we have automatic number plate recognition detection vehicles and systems, and we will plot up in a particular location. And cars that are of interest or involved in criminality, or there may be some issues with that particular vehicle, we will make vehicle stops in relation to that. But that's a pan-London thing. So the way we tend to operate in terms of vehicle crime tends to be a more pan-London thing. And we've got a dedicated command, MO8 we call it, which is the Roads and Policing Unit. So I would say the way we police roads policing in the Met is more pan-London, because it's the roads that you're looking to address, not particular geographic locations. I will actually take away what you said, because I agree with you. I think I spent 10 years in the counties force, so vehicle crime was, if you wanted to catch all the criminals, you stopped doing vehicle stops. So I do think you've got a really good point around that, and perhaps it is an oversight, something that we get back to and look at as a partnership to review, because I think there are some opportunities there as well.
So the stat I heard on recently on the number of people killed and seriously injured on Britain's roads is that every single year more people are killed and seriously injured by cars on Britain's roads than died in our entire 20-year deployment in Afghanistan. And those, of course, were military personnel who had signed up for the risk of being killed or injured. So this is a massive impact. So just that point. You may not know, but I work in digital industry, and digital ethics is one of the things that I touch on. So I'm very interested to hear that you are using live facial recognition cameras. Obviously, the example you gave was very good, and the police are to be commended for that incident. But I'm also very interested to hear that you said that you're using it responsibly. Are those guidelines available? Are they transparent? Because I think it would be very interesting to know how they are being used, because the civil liberties impact of live facial recognition is serious. I mean, I work in innovation, so I think it's good that we try these new technologies, but I think they absolutely need to be boundaried and regulated in a transparent way so that people understand what's happening.
Thank you. So I'll go back to your point. In terms of what we call FR deployments, at the moment it's going through a pilot phase in the Met. It's very, very heavily controlled by a central team. I can't just deploy officers using LFR. You've got a central team that they're doing it as part of their pilot. So there's loads of guardrails in relation to that. I find that a frustration personally, because I want to use the technology. I want to get these bad people off the streets. But you're absolutely right. We need to listen and be cognizant of those civil liberties arguments and make sure we're using it properly. So at the moment, it is a pilot in the Met, and it's centrally controlled.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you. I was just going to pick up on your comments about killed and seriously injured on the roads, and clearly Borough Command's come at it from the crime perspective, but you will be aware also of the Streets for People commitments with Vision Zero, for looking at it from the care side perspective, from that side of it, so how we design our streets in a way that minimises people's ability to be harmed on the streets. So notwithstanding the point in Borough.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the partnership. Wish you best of luck. It's really great to have you here, and the presentation was really excellent. I'm going late. A lot of my questions have probably been asked already, but with sort of like facing an increase in crime, what consideration has been given to expanding visible community-based safety solutions? Because I think the fear of crime is also something that we need to put real effort and attention into. We've heard about increasing community wardens. We've heard about potentially increasing CCTV, which doesn't just deter crime and provide evidence, it also provides that confidence to people. But, are there other solutions we could be exploring, like ensuring our neighbourhood policing teams aren't redeployed to other parts of the capital? Because that is something we see in the northwest of the borough a lot, and it's a real problem, for building confidence that we have local policing. But also other boroughs have done things like create safe spaces in key nightlife areas, putting up gazebos at train stations or outside nightclubs when there's a problem. Are these some of the approaches that we could be exploring more in Southwark, to actually look at our long-term strategy and to boost that public confidence in safety? And then I'd also just like to touch on another area about whether or not there's, given the importance of early intervention in preventing crime and preventing victims of crime, could we be doing more as a partnership, or building more partnerships with schools, with youth groups, with local businesses, to stop particularly young people from falling victims of crime, but also falling into criminality? And could more visible community-led initiatives alongside that enforcement play a greater role in our community safety?
I think that's you've literally said it. It is what it is. I mean, I don't think there's any more to add to that except for what we are doing. So I've made reference to the cabinet paper that sets out that there will be more engagement, really getting on the ground and working with communities and ensuring that they're empowered. In regards to the nighttime safety spaces, as you know, we've got 71 safe spaces across the borough. And these are places that we need to promote better so people actually know it exists. Because the ongoing concern for me is, if you have this resource and you're working so hard to make this happen, why don't people know? It means we're not shouting about it enough. So I'm hoping that as a result of this OS today, every one of you are aware of the activity that's taking place within that partnership. And the onus is on you now to go into your areas and talk to your communities about what you've learned today and all the strides that we're making. Because like I said in the cabinet paper, community safety is everybody's business. And that's why it's important that the whole partnership is here. So we have an opportunity to engage with them on that. In regards to the work that our voluntary sector does, it's tremendous. The State of Sector report sets out key recommendations of what we need to do as a local authority, and that's being looked at as part of the Southwark 2030 vision. How does that fit into neighbourhoods and the work of improving what we're trying to achieve, which is to make sure that communities are involved? That's about the things we're talking about in the Policing Oversight Board, making sure we don't have the same stakeholders at the table, making sure that we're getting out on the ground and engaging. And I'm hoping that elected members will be at the forefront on that of that, really driving home that message, getting involved. So I'm grateful to the people that have turned up to the Policing Oversight Board. I'm grateful for those who have shared the information in regards to what we're doing to community safety. And I'm hoping that when we send out emails that you will get involved, the Women's Safety Survey work that's being done, recognising that within the youth space, we're doing a lot of work around prevention. Looking at our resident survey, we have a number of youth services, but the key issue is, do people know that they exist? And if they don't, what can we do to promote that? Does that make sense? So I agree 100% with what you said, and I don't have anything more to say than what we are doing. Let's all get out there and promote it. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yes.
To Council, I think your ideas are excellent. So I think part of the thing we need to be as a partnership is just listening to new ideas and not being afraid to try stuff. So I think stuff like the gazebos, let's do it. I'm cognizant of what some of my other boroughs are doing. What I would say, the conundrum for us locally, particularly myself as BCU commander, we could suck all of our neighbourhood policing into that northwest quadrant, so all around London Bridge. But then what about Dulwich and other places across the borough? That you've got taxpayers there, that they deserve policing as well. So I don't think it's right that we do that. I think that there's what we have to be is quite sophisticated. So we pulse into our key areas, but we don't ever create a situation where we're only policing a part of Southwark. Really complex stuff, particularly when you think that we're not going to get any extra resources in the short term, at least. Around the protest and the deployment, there's a load of hard work that's been going on, and we have drastically reduced the numbers in terms of officers going on central London protest days. One of the things that the Mets and the Commission has been keen to do is, can we look at flexing officers from non-BCU departments into protest aid? And there's been a load of work into that, and we have seen those reductions. So whereas I was particularly frustrated maybe last year around the amount of officers on the Friday and Saturday being used for aid, I've seen that those reductions. So I'm hoping that continues throughout the year.
I don't think it's up for us to set the rota for the local police, but obviously, I guess, where there's nighttime economy centres, then one would expect the police to be there, rather than other parts of the borough where there's not so much going on at that particular time. Councillor Manuel.
Some of the things I wanted to highlight, Natasha has already done that. But what I want to know is what procedure is placed to prevent that from happening again, in terms of on the estates where people have to go down a corridor because one door, the guide or the person there is dealing in things that they're not happy with. And it's been reported, and things have been reported. What happens then? And my second question is it possible to put, in terms of the phone grabbing, to put posters up in different languages? Because I've seen somebody phone snatched and the person just arrived in the country. And my thoughts were, how are they going to get to where they're going? And everything is on the phone. And this poor man is running with his suitcase because this guy is pedaling on the bike. He just took his phone. So if there's a notice, perhaps they will know how to handle the information in a different way. So that was basically what I wanted to know, what procedures you have. And in terms of the housing association, we talk about the council, but how about the housing associations? Their tenants go through things as well. Do you liaise with them so that they can feel safe too?
Thank you, Sabina. As you know, part of the new approach to community safety is set out in the Cabinet paper. And what we're looking to do is to actually make sure that we're monitoring what's happening in our areas where there is reporting. And it's really important that residents understand that we don't live where they live. So when they're facing an increase of a specific issue, it's really important that they report it. So there's a difference between crime and ASB. So somebody taking drugs on the stairs is actually a crime, but people report that to the council. So what we're having to do, and we've been doing a lot of cross-council working, is engaging with the housing team, our resident service officers, because they will be the first point of contact in some of these instances to say, you need to make the police aware that this is happening here. If you're seeing drug dealing on your estates and you're not reporting it, or you're reporting it to the council, and say, for example, a resident service officer, the police won't get that information. But once we do have that level of reporting, we've made a commitment that we will go there, whether it's our warden service, whether it's our SASBU team, and we will engage in that area. To make sure people know what to report, how to report, and we're trying to make that as easy as possible. We're also making sure that our resident service officers, our cleaners, are well trained on how to report these issues, and it's been going positively. We've got a new data dashboard that we spoke about in the cabinet paper, where we're actually monitoring what's coming in. We know what our top 3 concerns are, and we're working through them. So in regards to what procedure do you have in place, we're monitoring the data quarterly. We're making sure that where issues are being reported to the council, if they are crimes, there's a commitment for that to be reported to the police directly. And we've got consensus from housing that that will be the new approach going forward. In regards to the signs, the police have some information called Look Up, Look Out. So Stephen talked about our Southwark Violence Reduction Unit. So they've been working with the police really, really closely. So these are being put out across different parts of the borough, especially where we know they are hotspot areas. There are mixed views as to whether they're effective or not. There is some evidence to suggest that they are effective. Nonetheless, they will be rolling out, and there are gazebos that are set up in different locations, phone marking, talking to people about IMEs on your phone. We've got a TikTok drive at the moment. We've got a dedicated resource for community safety in terms of our e-newsletter. And what we're trying to do more consistently is work with the police to make sure that we're reporting positive impact of joint council working. The QR, I think the in different languages, that's fantastic. Perhaps a QR code, and I guess this is something for Seb to take away, but also for me to raise with our comms team. In regards to our housing association tenants, I've been going around the borough quite a bit, and I've been hearing about concerns that are being raised. Obviously, that this is governed by a separate piece of legislation, but what we are doing and our teams continue to do is to exercise discretion and support residents in housing associations to report the crime or the issue that's going on. So if ASB is happening on a housing estate, the housing association estate, what you'll actually see is our SASBU officers writing directly to those organisations and making sure that that's passed through. Stephen is going to come in and give some more information.
Just to add to that briefly, the housing associations are subjected to exactly the same standards as we are by the social housing regulator as a landlord, how they tackle ASB. We do engage with them, we do provide advice to them. In some cases, my view, some to step up in how they actually deal with it very, very well, but they have exactly the same requirements as we do.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want we're really pushing time. Okay.
When somebody suspects that there's multiple offences going on, and they're frightened that if they report it, it will come back to them. And in terms of the harassment, I get it in my surgery all the time from housing association tenants. The neighbours are harassing them, and they have no proof. And how do you help people like that? And that's it.
I was just going to say very, very briefly, and one of the things we've agreed with our own housing officers is that they can be another route through which people can report things. So we will do that third-party reporting on the staff. It's hard stuff to do because I'm aware of lots of situations where being worried about reporting because they're reporting somebody that's daughter, same status. That is really difficult, but it's very
Great, thank you. I just wanted to ask about the probation service, particularly the community paid back scheme. How's that working then? No? I thought you might.
So in terms of working, do you?
I mean, you know, is it successful? Is it working as you would want it? And I mean, I don't know the numbers involved or anything like that, so it'd be useful to know.
So in Southwark, so I'm head of service for Southwark Probation Delivery Unit. So we currently have around 1,300 people who we supervise both in custody and in the community. 800 of those are around 800. I think it's 824 are actually in the community. So they'll either be on licence, so that means that they have been released from prison, and we're working with them, supervising them on licence, subject to licence conditions, or they'll be on community orders, which is where they've been through the court and they've been made subject to a sentence to be served in the community. And then within that, there are different requirements. So there's monitoring and control requirements, which is electronic monitoring, which is your tagging, GPS tagging, exclusions, that kind of thing. Then there's interventions, which are things like accredited programs, which are offence-focused behaviour work, unpaid work, which is the community payback. So there's several projects in Southwark whereby people can do from minimum of 80 hours to a maximum of 300 hours community payback. So yeah, I mean, we've got great partnership working in Southwark for the probation service and all sorts of partners. There's lots of very innovative schemes. We're heavily involved in the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub. We have representation at every partnership meeting. We have the Integrated Offender Management Scheme. So we have police officers co-located in our office where we work with the most prolific offenders within the community. So yeah, and I think just in terms of our resources, so obviously we've gone through a very challenging period, but we're looking a lot healthier in terms of resources for probation officers. And so yeah, things are stable, and there's very good partnership working.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you very much. And just one final point. You talked about sort of pan-London policy, and I was just interested to know how that might impact on Southwark locally. I mean, and also national policy. I'm thinking of things like, you know, the prevent, you know, to stop the radicalisation of young men and stuff like that. How much does that impact on Southwark?
So something like prevent, although it's run within London by our counter-terrorism directorate or department, but they still have very much local bases. So we're very much, your prevent teams will be very much intertwined with local authority and local policing. So probably that's a wrong example for me of pan-London policing. Where I'm talking more around pan-London policing is things like your murder investigations teams. So something like that, you don't have a local. If we have a homicide, touch wood, we don't have a homicide server, but if we do, then we have specialist murder investigations teams that will take over that investigation. The same with shooting. So I know gun crime figures here were listed, but actually Southwark for the last calendar year had 5 lethal barrel discharges, was 10th in the list in London, and is going down. And that's because we have tried them, and they've really worked hard with our local policing units to bear down on the gangs within Southwark. So that's been a great success in terms of the work we're doing. With those specialist teams, because of the specialist training, the technology, the fact that they can work internationally as well. That's the reason why they're quite specialist. But they've been working great in terms of their input on Southwark. Thank you.
Reassuring to know. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I think we've probably grilled you enough this evening, so thank you for coming along. We're going to save the fire brigade for next time. You'll be glad to hear. So thank you all for turning up and your contribution. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah. Just to confirm, would you like the final plan to come back to OSC?
I think. Yeah.
Yes, and the feedback to be taken. Okay, thank you.
Please. Yeah. Great. Okay.
I note in the papers on the 27th of February, the Violence Against Women's Forum is meeting. I'm not sure if it's by invitation only, or are we able members to promote it to our communities?
At this point, it's not open to the communities, but what will happen is when we are doing events, we will be sharing that information more widely. But I think there's scope for us to come and assess some of the work that's being done, but that will be subject to agreement with the senior officers.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks again, everybody. Good evening. I think we'll have a 5-minute break because we've been going for an hour and a half, and then we'll come back and hear the next item. Very much. Okay, if we could get together again, please. I'd like to move on to item 6, the Statement of Community Involvement and Development Consultation Charter. Since the publication of the agenda, we've had a written representation from the We Love Snowfields community group, setting out comments on the statement of the consultation charter and on their experience of the previous process. So I intend to allow the group to present their representation before hearing from the relevant cabinet member and officers. So can I invite you to come forward, please? That's okay. Sit yourself down first. Now, what you have to do is to press the silver button so that we can hear you loud and clear. And I'm just bring the microphone a bit closer to you because we had that problem with the previous representatives. So if you just begin by introducing yourself and you know what capacity you're here this evening, please, and then make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my name's Claire Burks. I chair a local association, Bermondsey Street London, which is a group of residents and businesses in the Bermondsey Street area, and we work together as volunteers to make our lovely area as good as it can possibly be for the people who live there and work there and come to visit. I'm also part of a group that Councillor Wingfield has referred to, We Love Snowfields, which is another community grouping which has been set up in response to a particular development situation along Snowfields, which is a street that runs to the south of Guy's Hospital, King's College. Right. But I gather it would be better if I didn't say anything specifically about that particular development process. So I'm going to concentrate on the points that the responses to this consultation from both Bermondsey Street London and We Love Snowfields have in common. So there are 3 main points. I don't want to overburden you. There's lots of detail in both responses, but the 3 main points are this. The first is that we're delighted that the council has recognised that the early engagement stage of community consultation, the stage that happens before a planning application is submitted, that hasn't been working as well as it could or should over the past few years since the charter was first developed. And so it's very welcome that there's a round now of proposed improvements. What I would say is that when we review the changes that have been proposed to the consultation charter, the view of both our organisations is that in fact the charter provisions are sadly not strengthened by these changes, but weakened. So I'll give you some examples. So one is that in the original charter, as part of the fact-based audit that was required to be produced by a developer, there was a requirement to include heritage and accessibility and movement, and those 3 topics have been deleted in the latest version. And we feel that that will seriously weaken the fact-based audit and that those factors are definitely worthy of staying in. The second thing is that with the best of intentions, I'm sure, the proposed change in the treatment of the early engagement strategy, we think it leaves it even, is it an adverb or an adjective, even wider open to gaming and box ticking, which we know human beings are easily tempted into in situations, particularly where there are large amounts of money at stake, which of course major developments are just such situations. So the early engagement strategy has been a requirement for a major developer to produce to demonstrate to the council that all the processes and arrangements and resources are in place for proper community consultation. And in the past, that was a document that was required before the planning application could be submitted, but it never got made public. So it was not subject to any scrutiny by members of the community. The latest provisions say indeed that the early engagement strategy should be made public, but the proposed wording is very soft, I would say. It says that the early engagement strategy must be made public before the planning application is submitted. Well, if I were a developer with a big sum of money in my mind and was, the kind of person that was susceptible to opportunities to game or box tick, then I might think to myself that these changes would make it possible for me to deliver one printed copy of the early engagement strategy to the council's offices the day before I submit the planning application, and that would meet the requirement. And it certainly would not meet the community's desire and requirement for the opportunity to input, because we would want to see that early engagement strategy. If it's going to be made public, it's only useful if it's made public early enough in the process for the community and others to see it, be able to comment on it, and make sure it's of appropriate quality. So I'm very concerned about that. Also, the wording says nothing about what making it public means. So there's no specific requirement for availability of printed copies at any particular locations, for inclusion of the documents on any particular websites. There's nothing about the timing of when this document should be made available. So in the two organisations' comments on these proposed changes to the Charter, a couple of possible solutions are suggested. They're slightly different, but the tightest one is that there should be a very first pre-application meeting with planning officers and the developer, where before anything about the design of the proposed scheme is discussed, the early engagement strategy should be discussed and approved. And so I think that's the tightest version of a different way of handling that, which would give all parties, particularly the community, a much stronger basis for seeing and scrutinising and being satisfied that that's an appropriate strategy. The third thing, which I'd highlight, was actually a thing that was missing. I shouldn't say that implies that that was a mistake. It was not referred to explicitly in the original Charter document and still isn't referred to explicitly in this current Charter, and that is the use by developers of third-party companies to manage the consultation process. And all our experience says that third-party companies have a strong tendency to act as a barrier to clear and effective communication of community ideas and input into the developer. So you find consultation events being run by a third party, a PR or other communications company on behalf of the developer, perhaps no senior people. I mean, quite often consultation meetings with the community have one person from the developer present at the meeting being run by the third party, and that person is very often not all that senior and would not be credible taking any messages from the community back into his own organisation. They just would not get back into the organisation at a level where they could have any influence. So we Love Snowfields and Bermondsey Street London would really like to see some words to the effect that if a developer chooses to use a third-party company to manage the consultation, we would like it at the very least that at any meetings with the community or consultation exhibitions or whatever, that at least one senior person from the developer organisation must be present. And that's the kind of thing that could appear in an early engagement strategy, that the developer could commit to provide one senior member of staff to attend. So those are the 3 points I really wanted to highlight, because those are the 3 points that both organisations feel are really important. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I mean, that was perfect in your presentation and absolutely spot on. And I think we all understood what you require from us. So thank you very much. I'll just throw it open to members if there's any questions at all. Councillor C.
Excellent presentation. I suspect you're a teacher. Were you? Oh my gosh! Well,
no business.
Ah, okay, logical. I can find very little fault with this, but I'm familiar with the use of third-party agencies. They are quite traditional, they understand the processes and have teams already set up who are good communicators. So, is your real challenge here? You've suggested that if a developer uses a third-party agency, that the result of that consultation would not be fed back to the developer. And as a consequence, therefore, I'm assuming the application doesn't respond to the results of that community meeting. What evidence do you have to suggest that is so?
I have no written evidence, but for 15 years or so, I have been responding to planning applications for 15 years or so, I have been responding on behalf of Bermondsey Street London and its predecessor organisation, Bermondsey Street Area Partnership, on planning applications. And it's my experience that while the individuals employed by those third-party organisations may well have excellent communication skills, there may be something in the process or a steer from senior managers that prevents them from exercising those skills in getting the messages back from the community into the developer organization. It's almost sometimes you feel as if there's a cordon sanitaire around the community consultation and there's no desire for input to cross that cordon sanitaire. So I'm not saying it always happens that way. It doesn't necessarily happen that way. It just, in practice.
Well, it depends if you're going to get in trouble if you say it or not. But please be my guest.
Well, forgive me, Chair. I will be very careful. I suppose, ma'am, if you were able to present some evidence that the third-party agencies are actually failing the developers, and as a consequence, we are receiving poor inputs into the final application, that would help a great deal. I've got some experience in these matters, so I'm just seeking some evidence, and notwithstanding your own personal anecdotal experience, if you are able to refer to maybe some independent report that has made some assessment of their effectiveness or otherwise, that would be very useful. I think it's a useful suggestion. It's kind of logical that the applicant should have a reasonably senior person at a community meeting which is being hosted and managed by the third-party agency. I can see the logic in that, but I want to be sure if we were to assert the recommendation that there is some evidence to support it as being reasonable and logical in this instance.
Sorry, I don't want to speak for you, but if I may, Martin, I think there isn't any direct evidence because obviously Claire and other people weren't involved directly in that process with the third party and developer. However, I think what you were saying is that in the eventual report or production of the outcome of meetings with the community, a lot of what the community input was absent. Yes, so they either ignored or they didn't choose to comment on a lot of the community arguments. Would that be a correct reading of what you're saying?
That's how we feel very often.
That in itself is evidence in the sense that it's not there. If that makes sense. So you'd have to do a comparison between what the community submitted and what was the eventual report. Yes, aspects were common. I'm sure if you've been doing it for 15 years, there's plenty of examples you could draw upon in that time. But anyway, that's my understanding of it. Okay. Right. I don't think there's any further questions on directly to you, Claire. So thank you very much for coming this evening and for your presentation. I'm sure you could get a job with the council on presenting things, but it's good to see you. Thank you very much. And I'd now like to call up Helen Dennis, a relevant cabinet member, and the officers, please. Thank you. Thank you. Obviously, just for the record, if you could introduce yourselves first of all and the capacity you're here, and obviously you've just listened to what's been said. If you could incorporate the comments that were made there and say that would help obviously things as well at some point. I know you're here to give a presentation otherwise, but it would be useful to do that in the process.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Councillor Helen Dennis. I'm the Cabinet Member for New Homes and Sustainable Development.
Good evening, I'm Stephen Platt, Director of Planning and Growth. Hi, I'm Colin Wilson, Assistant Director of Strategic Developments. And Charlotte.
Yes, good evening. I'm Charlotte Brooks-Laurie. I'm the Head of Planning Policy.
So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we are currently in the middle of a live consultation on our statement of community involvement, which is a statutory planning document, and our development consultation charter, which is something that we chose as Southwark to bring forward several years ago. It was adopted 2 years ago, but we were in lots of discussions prior to that about how we could really hold developers more accountable for the quality and strength of consultation that they do when they bring forward particularly major and strategic applications in our borough. So that was the history of it, really, that we wanted to really be leading the way in terms of the quality of consultation that we expect to see from developers in this borough, and to set it out very clearly in the development consultation charter. So that was adopted, said December 2022. So we have been kind of taken the opportunity to review how that has been operating and look at where we could tidy things up and strengthen things. And certainly the objective is to strengthen and not to weaken. So I think we all share that in the room, and certainly with the organisations that made their representations this evening, there is that shared objective. I guess a couple of things that I would highlight. I'll deal with some of the issues that were raised to start with. So certainly on the early engagement strategy, we did want to kind of clear up this issue as to whether it should be made public or not. I hear the question about tightening up, like being really clear about when in the process to avoid it just being submitted just before the deadline, if you like. So we will take that away and we will look at that. I think when we're trying to think practically about what happens, and you'll see in the documents, you've got the templates there as well. So to summarise, the early engagement strategy is essentially planning what you're going to do, like who are you going to engage with, who do you need to outreach to, and when are you going to hold your meetings, or what are the other methods you might be using, etc. So I think it's quite right that that is obviously discussed at a pre-application stage, and the officers can talk a little bit more about how that works. So it's not a tick box exercise, it's very much a conversation and a challenge where people are kind of suggestions are made. But I would expect it, as a matter of course, at that very early stage, to then be taken to ward councillors, and for a draft essentially to be made public to ward councillors, so that they can also then make comments. So I think at the early stages it's quite iterative. So the question is, at what point do you then publish something and say this is the early engagement strategy? But we can try and pin that down. There was reference to some of the things that have been taken out of the fact-based audit. And I would also say the fact-based audit itself came from representations and made from the voluntary and community sector. And I think has been a very kind of useful tool to ensure that developers really understand the context in which they're coming into when they are bringing forward proposals. The areas that were mentioned have just been taken out to avoid duplication. So there are other statements, for example, that deal with heritage that are required. So the question has been, do we need to have that information in 2 documents? or is there some value? And I guess this is the question again, we'll reflect on this following, the consultation responses. Is there a value in kind of having it all together in that one place as a summary in the fact-based audit? But that's the reason that things have been taken out. And just on the use of third-party companies, I mean, certainly I put it on record that my preference would always be for the developer to do it in-house. I think it makes it, it's just more straightforward, isn't it? You know who you're dealing with. But the reality is that a lot of organisations do outsource it. And again, I do hear the representation about kind of having senior level engagement, because, I think it is absolutely essential. The one thing that we do, and we have kind of required as developers, is a particular format around you said, we did. So that is, we put that in place exactly so that the community can see how their representations and comments in consultation sessions have actually translated into action, whether they've been kind of feeding those ideas through a third party or not. There is a format there and a template again that we've put in place to try and make that explicit. But we will take all of those comments away as we process the consultation responses over the next couple of months. I think those were the kind of main points. I suppose the other things to note, because there are some other things that we are doing, other minor changes. We are bringing the equality impact needs assessment in line with our kind of wider kind of ENA reporting process, including requesting information on how socioeconomic disadvantage is being taken account of. We're also kind of integrating some wider work and language around social value reporting into the documents. And there is also a change in relation to what we require from some of the council-led projects. At the moment, all council-led projects are subject to the Development Consultation Charter, even if that is very minor. So even a kind of renovation or installation of windows or some other kind of minor project, all the templates still have to be filled in, etc. And it is quite onerous when it's a very small project. So that is being just taken out, just to clarify the kind of scale of project that needs to go through the DCC. I think those are the kind of main points that I wanted to highlight. But officers might want to supplement. I don't know if Charlotte wants to add, because she's really been leading on the policy consultation.
Yes, thank you. That's very comprehensive coverage of the questions raised. I think really just to supplement that explanation, I just wanted to point out that the purpose of the ENA is taken very seriously. It's used by case officers to ensure that the public sector quality duty can be discharged. It involves a really thorough assessment of protected characteristics as well as socioeconomic impacts, and that is discussed with applicants very early on in the process. So part of the benefit of the system we have with the Development Consultation Charter is the fact that it's not just about impacts on the design of schemes, it's about how impacts can be mitigated. For example, if there is a scheme that involves the partial closure, for example, of a supermarket, we would be very much pushing for that supermarket to remain open. We would look at the interlinkages to things like bus stops, how that would impact on different groups of the community, the users of that high street. We would even look at the types of uses on a high street. If there was going to be an impact on shop uses, would it be affecting particular sectors of the community? For example, if there's a halal food outlet whereby the catchment might be quite large. So I really wanted to just sort of demonstrate that this is taken sort of very seriously from the early engagement strategy and those initial discussions at pre-application stage all the way through as part of the application process and the consideration of that ENA. So some of these benefits can be quantified. We can certainly point to schemes where there has been a positive impact on the actual design and massing of buildings, but also there's unseen benefits whereby we're prompting developers and their agents to really think hard about the scheme and how they're going to mitigate those impacts as part of the phasing of that scheme. And those are often also then wrapped up in planning conditions should that application be approved. I also wanted to say that the SCI and DCC is actually called out as an example of best practice by the Royal Town Planning Institute. There's a research paper that was published last year, and I can circulate that link afterwards if people are interested, but it particularly calls out the fact that the stewardship and the community engagement and ownership that's inherent within the approach taken with the DCC is a real benefit. So I think whilst clearly there are things that we can go away and look at, and we will certainly do that, the fact that we have this mechanism in place is already creating really good outcomes for the developments which are coming forward through the planning pipeline. I'll just pause there in case there's any questions so far, or any particular areas that people want to sort of drill down to more detail.
Sure. Thank you very much. Unless the other officers want to say anything at this stage. No?
Chair, I was just going to really outline the different roles Charlotte and Colin have. Really, Charlotte is leading on the policy development and the changes, and she'll bring forward the revised development consultation charter to be adopted at Cabinet, where Colin's really here to explain how it's applied in practice and how it's been working since 2022 when we formally adopted it, if developers are complying with it, and how these changes are meant to improve, if you like, that experience both for the developers and the communities who may want to have a say about development coming forward. So I just wanted to explain why Charlotte and Colin are here. That's all. They have slightly different roles in the process.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I just going back to the points that were made earlier on. I mean, I think it seems fairly logical that developers should be able to deposit the community engagement strategy the day before they submit planning applications. So I think we do need some sort of buffer before then in terms of getting that engagement strategy in. In relation to the elements that have been taken out because of duplication, I think some reference, some cross-reference to other documents where they're included, so that people don't get the wrong idea that they've been taken out altogether. I think there needs to be some sort of reference to that. Yes. And then finally, I mean, I do have a great deal of empathy about having a developer present when they have these community meetings, because in my own ward with Mission Care in Love Walk, we've had numerous meetings where we've gone through the third party, and the applicant hasn't been present at all. I think it just leaves a bad taste in people's mouths when the applicant isn't there, and it's almost as if they don't care what the community has to say. That's the impression that's given, and I don't think that's the impression we want to convey as a local authority. I'm probably giving everybody's answer to this, but anyway, I'll throw. I'll let another councillor speak first, Martin, if you don't mind. Oh, sorry, did you want to speak? Oh, right, okay, fair enough. I've got Councillor Chamberlain first.
Thank you, Chair. And I was interested in how this works in reality and how the proposed changes would affect planning and development in the borough. And just before this meeting tonight, I was at a briefing for the planning committee about Borough Triangle in my ward. That's 900 homes. That's where the developer's only proposing to build 17% affordable housing, genuinely affordable housing. But they made great virtues out of the fact that they've consulted 2,000 residents and spoken to lots of communities, and it's likely to get approval from this administration. So the developers pleading poverty in the viability assessment that they can't deliver more affordable housing despite making £550 million profit last year. So this proposed updated DCC says that it will deliver social value and align with Southwark's 2030 goals. Can you provide concrete examples of how these new measures will increase the provision of affordable housing and grow and protect local job opportunities? And what safeguards are in place to ensure that community engagement is not dominated by big developers and well-funded developers like Berkeley Group that are drowning out the voices of local people, particularly when they're in housing need? You know, in SE1 alone, there are over 2,800 people on the housing waiting list. There's only 305 comments on the Borough Triangle application right now. So clearly there's, you know, thousands of people that are disenfranchised, not engaged in the process. So would the proposed changes that are on the table tonight have got a better deal for the community at Borough Triangle?
Can I just say one thing to start with, which is obviously I think it's important for us not to get into the detail of any single planning application this evening, because a lot of live planning applications have been referenced. So I don't think it's that helpful. For the record, obviously the scheme that you mentioned does come in policy compliant in terms of 35% affordable housing, and there are particular measurements around habitable room per unit, etc. We could get into that, and I'm sure planning committee will get into that. But I'll let Colin maybe kind of respond in terms of how it is working in practice and how we're holding developers, particularly large strategic developers, accountable.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this working in practice, I mean, part of it is socialising it as an idea, and it appeared in draft in 2019, I think. So over that period of the last 5 years, it's become something that developers expect to be asked about. So developers and their agents expect to provide this information. I think inevitably, you know, when these things are in draft, there's usually a bit of a slow start. But now there is an expectation that these things are provided. In terms of a proof of how that's having an impact, in main committee over the last 3 years, so since 21, planning committee has approved 7,200 homes. That's more than our housing target. So our housing target about 6,900. In terms of delivery, last year 1,992 homes were delivered in the borough. Of the 7,200 homes approved since 21, when this approach was still in draft, but you know was shortly to be adopted in 22, something like 40% of those are affordable. So I think is the Development Consultation Charter and the ESS the only things which have done those things? No, but it's made an important contribution to delivering. I think that, you know, a good throughput development in the borough, which I think, you know, gives a good social benefit in terms of addressing the affordable housing waiting list, because it's unaffordable coming forward, and is also usually a very good design quality, because we're fortunate to operate in a borough where there are, you know, relatively high values, still strong demand for housing. We see a huge need for affordable housing. So yeah, I mean, looking at the figures, I think it's part of a series of things done, including the 2022 Southwark plan, that have had a really good outturn. I mean, certainly compared to our neighbouring boroughs.
But can I just quickly ask, of those affordable homes that have been consented, you know, do you think the 18,000 people on the housing waiting list in the borough and the thousands of people that are in an unaffordable private rental sector think that we are actually getting homes that they can afford? Because and do they think the planning? Would you say that they think the planning system is working for them? Because it doesn't feel that way to a lot of people in Southwark.
Look, affordable housing is absolutely the top priority in terms of planning policy.
They can afford.
Yeah. So, and you know that our affordable housing policy is very tight, and for some time we've had specific targets, unlike other local authorities, on delivering social rent. So we've been very, very clear about that. And for that reason, the GLA figures between 2015-16 and 22-23 show that Southwark had the most social rent starts in the whole of London. Is it enough? No, and we're really clear about that. And that's why we're leading on the future council housing work nationally as well. And it's why we've got one of the biggest council house building programmes. We want to be using every lever possible. And that's why the Southwark plan was also very much kind of ahead of its time in requiring what we require from student accommodation as well, which is providing now social rent homes alongside student accommodation in a way that is not also delivered in other London boroughs at all at the moment. So I think we've been trying to use every lever that we can. I know that for those people on the housing waiting list, it is incredibly challenging at the moment. But I think that planning committee, as Colin outlined, is doing all that it can to really push for genuinely affordable housing. Through planning policy, we are really trying our best and have been at the forefront of delivering social rent homes, and through our own council house building programme too. So we are always welcome to other ideas and other suggestions of how we can do more and deliver more. But what I would say is, in terms of the DCC, the fact-based audit that we require is part of, ensuring that developers take account of housing need in their local area. So, we've been providing, if you look at, what we've done on the Old Kent Road, for example, we've provided the breakdown of the kind of housing waiting list figures so that developers can actually see, and indeed we can see as a council housing developer, what the need is for 1, 2, 3, 4 bed, etc. properties, what the numbers look like, etc. And so we can monitor that and provide that information. And we know that the community will absolutely put affordable housing at the top of their list when they're talking with developers. And I think that is heard loud and clear. And some of the kind of you said we did templates that we have back and reports that we have back from developers do reflect that. I'm not saying they're perfect, and we would always push them to do more.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I do think it's necessary for me to say, and please legal officers here, as I'm reserved on planning, just to emphasise that I retain an open mind on all applications might be put forward, even those that might be mentioned in this meeting. I want to emphasise that for the record. I want to also just take up on Councillor Dennis's point on the, indeed, and Councillor Wilson, indeed, Mr. Wilson's comment on the, you said we did format, which I've seen on numerous occasions in the past, and appears, notwithstanding your comments, Chair, as well, appears to indicate that a third party involvement in this, who are specialists in communication, their job is to capture all comments made by the community and reliably relay that to their client, because it's in their commercial interest to do so. And at this point, I've not seen suggestions that process has not worked. I might revert back to Colin, if I don't mind, just to ensure that my interpretations of past examples of the you said we did format, in his experience, can you just confirm that generally speaking, could be general rather than precise, that is indeed the case, that the PR communication agency's interest is to represent what was said at a meeting and accurately relay that to their clients, because it's in their commercial interest to do so. And of course, you most probably will have a representative of planning at those meetings to ensure that is actually so. If you could just confirm, please.
Yeah, I can see absolutely where Claire's frustration comes from in respect of not having a senior person there from a developer. We do have senior people there from planning. The purpose being, you want to hear it directly from people about what the issue is. I think Claire described it as a cordon sanitaire potentially around the developer. I don't think they set out to do that necessarily intentionally. But I think it can have that effect because you're not there kind of nights listening to people face to face. I would say not all developers do that. I mean, there are developers who do turn up with a senior team for public meetings and ward councillor meetings, including some of the bigger developers like Berkeley Homes. But in terms of would it be a good suggestion to have a request for perhaps senior people from the development team to do that? I think that would be a good idea. In terms of the feedback, again, it varies. Some you said the documents are very clear and there are meaningful changes that have been made. It's not, as Councillor Dennis said, it's not always perfect. But I think, it's a very good idea to have some senior representatives, developers, these meetings, and not just the PR team.
I mean, it's very much in their interest, just as much as anybody else's at the end of the day. I mean, seems fairly commonsensical to me. I'm not a developer. So any other questions? The officers? No? Thank you very much for coming this evening, and we wish you well with your consultation. And thank you to Claire and Jackie for coming from Bermondsey Street. Thank you very much. Right, let's move on to the next item, which is the Scrutiny Improvement Review. We're going to hear from the Head of Scrutiny, Everton Roberts, giving us an update report on the implementation of the actions which arose from the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny's review that we had. And if you could keep the microphone very, very close to you. Otherwise, I'll have to keep it.
Okay,
so would you like to off, please?
Okay, yeah. Good evening, members. Thank you for hearing from me today. As you know, I was here a couple of weeks ago presenting a very late report on the Scrutiny Improvement Review, so I recognise that you didn't have time to read that document. Hopefully you've had time to read it this time around, so I won't go into too much detail and rather deal with things by questions. But before I do, there are a few things I'd just like to draw to your attention. So the Scrutiny Improvement Review actions were agreed in October 2023, and they resulted in around 130 separate actions. And those actions were to be progressed over a 2-year period leading up to May 2025. The individual actions and the progress against them are set out in Appendix 3 of this agenda, supplement agenda number 3, I believe. I won't go through those individual actions, but happy to take questions on them. Many of the recommendations are tweaks to what we already have in practice, but if applied correctly, should improve our scrutiny process. And whilst there are around 130 actions, there are actually only 11 overall recommendations, along with a number of enhancements. And those recommendations and enhancements are set out in the main officer report, along with progress against those recommendations. And a key part to reshaping our scrutiny process in line with the recommendations and improvements suggested by the Scrutiny Improvement Review, all around strengthening the collaborative relationship between scrutiny, cabinet and directors, and of course whilst maintaining scrutiny's independence. And this was recommendation 1 of the Scrutiny Improvement Review, and that recommendation talks about more systematic involvement of portfolio holders and directors, which would enable scrutiny to identify trends, issues and topics which it can focus on and add accountability and impact. In response to that, a Cabinet Scrutiny Protocol has been developed. This is set out at Appendix 1 of the report, and if agreed, will address a number of the recommendations and actions highlighted in the Scrutiny Improvement Review. And as separately communicated to members, the aim of the protocol is to encourage and formalise dialogue between individual cabinet members and scrutiny chairs. The actual scrutiny commissions obviously will be involved, but for the purpose of the Scrutiny Improvement Review, the scrutiny chairs and the cabinet members to lead the process, as it were. We want to improve the scrutiny work programming process by scrutiny being actively informed by cabinet members and senior officers about key strategic priorities and potential areas of focus and assistance in scoping those scrutiny reviews. I mean, at the moment, or not so much at the moment, but what was highlighted in the actual report from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny was that scrutiny, whilst being ambitious, should aim to try and take on less within a particular period of time, which therefore requires a bit more focus. And one of the general aims of scrutiny is for it to be in line with the Council's strategic priorities to ensure that it's looking at the right things. The actual Cabinet Scrutiny Protocol is also aimed at committing scrutiny to a process of prioritising the work and focusing on areas where it can really add value. And this is informed by the input of Cabinet members and senior officers. Committing scrutiny to focus on arriving at evidence-based smart recommendations. An important part of this is when it comes to Cabinet providing responses and officers implementing recommendations, one of the things that we're being asked to do or recommended to do to show impact and how scrutiny is adding value is to be able to monitor those recommendations and see when and how they've been implemented. In order to do that, we need smart and less the leadership. When I say leadership, I'm talking about Cabinet members and senior officers to involve in scrutiny in more pre-decision scrutiny work, policy development, and the protocol aims to commit to that. We want the leadership to commit to providing scrutiny with timely information around performance, so that scrutiny can fulfill its objective of kind of checking how the council is going against delivering against the council delivery plan. We want to commit Cabinet members to provide information in a timely manner and in a form that scrutiny can interrogate. And we also want to be able to for scrutiny to keep Cabinet members and senior officers informed of scrutiny activity. And again, that's where that dialogue between Cabinet members and chairs of scrutiny will come in. And as part of that process, we want to see that discussion supported by officer support. I mean, it's difficult to discuss and come away with exactly what was discussed and decided. So the offer is for members of the scrutiny team to support their respective chairs in having those conversations with Cabinet members. In terms of timescales, we're hoping to have the protocol in place by March / beginning of April. This is in order for us to start looking at the work programme for scrutiny for the following year. One of the things we do keep getting caught out on is by only suggesting at our first meetings in the municipal year what items you want to look at. That takes away the opportunity to have proper discussions with officers and Cabinet members to see whether or not the issues that scrutiny is interested in are issues worth investigating and whether or not we can add value, and also the best method of actually undertaking that particular scrutiny improvement review. So if we start earlier, we can start having those conversations earlier. So that's all I'll say about the Cabinet Scrutiny Protocol, other than your comments would be welcome, so I can take back and feed that into the process. It's out for consultation with Cabinet and also CMT, and so you'll be valuable. One of the issues I mentioned earlier was about tracking impact. The scrutiny improvement talks about having in place a method of tracking impact. We've developed it is an Excel spreadsheet, but what it shows, and it goes back to 2023, 24, and there's a reason for that, is how many recommendations have been made per scrutiny review, how many of those recommendations have been adopted, and eventually it will show how many of those recommendations have been implemented. The reason for going back to 2023, 24 is because the reports would have been written, the Cabinet responses would have been given, and enough time should have gone by now for officers to implement the recommendations which were agreed. So we'll be able to start tracking how they've been implemented, whether or not implemented. So we're going through a process of starting with officers about how they've actioned recommendations, and then two, the actual commissions may want to invite Cabinet members along to talk about issues that have been agreed in the past. So that's set out in Appendix 2 of the report. It's still being populated and will be shared with the committee and commission chairs, with the committee and scrutiny in general, once it has been fully completed. And in terms of another aspect of scrutiny, which is around engaging with the public, we're hoping to have more dialogue with the public. And what we're doing currently is there's a website, which is a Southwark website called Engage at Southwark, which appears to have quite a bit of functionality. One of the aspects of that page will be to enable a platform where the public can put forward suggestions for topics that they think ought to be scrutinised. There will obviously need to be some kind of a shortlisting process, and the detail of that is still to be determined, which your comments on that we welcome at your stage. We're hoping to have that in place by March to enable that to feed into the 25-26 work planning year. What that page will also do is enable us to share the current activity of scrutiny so that the public can be more informed and hopefully more engaged with council's scrutiny process. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions if you.
Okay, thanks for that, Everton. Just to clarify for benefit then, so in terms of the outstanding recommendations from the scrutiny group, a lot of them hang on the agreement of the cabinet and scrutiny protocol, and then presumably this protocol is going to cabinet to be agreed. Is that correct?
It's not going to cabinet, it's going to cabinet members. Because scrutiny is not a cabinet function, it's been considered that we just need to consult with them. So I'm hoping to get some kind of confirmation from the cabinet office that the cabinet members are happy and signed up to the process.
Okay, so I'm sorry to over the point. So in other words, we agree then.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Fine. Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out who's deciding on this. Okay. Fine. So once we've agreed it, then the cabinet members.
Okay. So this is the little bit of the tricky bit. I mean, I was hoping to ask members to agree to the protocol today. However, I think it's safer to ask cabinet members to provide comments today if you have any, or in the next couple of days, so that can be shared with the cabinet members, and then we'll get their comments on the actual protocol, and we'll get the CMT comments on the protocol, and that can be reported back to yourselves either as it currently is or with some alternative suggestions for you to agree. I mean, the only thing I would say is this does require agreement from you all in order for it to actually work.
No, I'm just conscious of the timescales you raised as well in getting it all in March, and we're not meeting again until 31st of March. And so I was wondering and proposing that if the committee is happy or whatever comments are taken on board this evening, we can then send that out to the cabinet members, and if they're in agreement, should we say, or there's no position or amendment to forward, then we can just notify by email effectively, and it's introduced. Yes?
Okay, Chair.
I mean, it seems better than hanging on for another 6 weeks, whatever. But anyway, yeah, I think that's all. I just that's a long piece.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, everything. It's really helpful. My question is about recommendation 5 and the engagement, which talk me through it. It sounds like a great idea to have this Engage Southwark website for a, let's say, aggrieved member of the public. It will be very difficult to know what kind of remedies they have. They can go, to their ward councillors with a specific case, or they can obviously then go to such a website, and it'll be, I suppose, difficult to explain to the member of the public what is and what isn't part of the remit of this group of the scrutiny committees, and what is, if you want, specific casework. Sometimes there is an overlap. So, and if we are supposed to take into consideration, say, suggestions let's say your website is very successful, which I hope it will be, and you get loads and loads and loads of people who come with all kinds of different, suggestions that could range from, I suppose, something more in the realm of the conspiracy theory to some very, very concrete, well, what it's like, to some very valid and very concrete proposals for, processes that are wrong. Theoretically, we could end up with, having to schedule another, I don't know, 500 meetings in addition to those we already have. How do you manage expectations? How do we manage the workload that may come out of such a site? And how do we tell people that their suggestions will not be considered for scrutiny without having, repercussions from that, the backlash?
Okay, thank you for your question, Councillor Bonvis. Now, what the website will contain is information about scrutiny, what it's about, the types of issues it looks at. As you may be aware, scrutiny doesn't look at individual issues. So issues of complaints, it will be flagged up that complaints aren't dealt with. There will be a shortlisting process, as I mentioned earlier, and it will still need to be run through the criteria of whether or not scrutiny can add value. And the thing why I'm not shying away from it is because other local authorities do invite the public to suggest topics. So it's just about us having information in place that makes it clear what it is, a process for informing individuals as to why something may or may not have been looked at, and a group of officers or individuals that will enable us to shortlist that process.
Can I just add to that? I mean, we have examples from our immediate sister authorities, Lambeth and Lewisham, where they operate like a refining process, so that we don't end up with 500 complaint-related scrutiny requests. So I think that's going to come back to this committee. The website Engage at Southwark is a separate initiative, but in terms of defining, the scrutiny aspect of that, it'll still be determined by this committee, won't it?
Yes, what we're doing at the moment is we're running or putting together a back-end pilot, so it's not public. So we're working out exactly how the page functions, the information that will be on it, and we'll be sharing it with members ahead of anything going public or going live. But we are factoring in the fact that we do need to be able to manage expectations. And part of that is the fact that scrutiny looks at issues in general.
Any other points? No? Okay. Sorry, Suzanne. Sorry, I did see you. Sorry.
Yeah, what I wanted to ask was, you said early starting. As it is, we struggle with getting here for 6:30 sometimes. And I agree that we shouldn't be closing late as well. And then another point is the pre-meetings. It's difficult to arrange these pre-meetings because people have other things to do. And these pre-meetings are not already calendared. They are like, you come up with it. We have a pre-meetings, and then you find out that everybody can attend. And I will also welcome the training we put in as well.
Okay. In terms of early, when I referenced early, I was talking about early engagement of the work planning, i.e. starting at an earlier point in time rather than waiting till after the municipal year, waiting to see which chairs have been appointed, etc. Your point is taken on the pre-meetings. I mean, what I anticipate is with an earlier start to the process, with better engagement with officers and members, we'll be able to identify what is needed for members to undertake a successful, inclusive scrutiny review, and be able to provide members with ample notice along with specific information about what a pre-meeting may contain. And also what we may be able to do is record those pre-meetings so that individuals who aren't able to attend can look at it at some point in the future. What we're trying to move to is a point where scrutiny, the actual meetings themselves, are about testing out information they've received as opposed to them being education sessions. We're hoping that those pre-meetings will become more useful to provide members with information in advance of actually what they're going to be looking at the actual committee.
I could just add to that, and that's a very good question you raised, Suzanne. I mean, the thing is that we're still in the process of getting everything adopted from this scrutiny review. We're not quite 100% there. And one of the things I'd like to see is have these pre-meetings factored in to the annual calendar. Part of that rests on getting this agreement of the Cabinet Scrutiny Protocol, because that's a better way of working together, having these meetings factored in. And when I don't mean working with the Cabinet members, I mean working with the chief officers and other officers that will be involved with these pre-meetings. So, yeah, at the moment we have the formal council calendar of committee meetings, and then there's like a shadow calendar of informal meetings, which aren't committee meetings, because it takes up members' time just as much as committee meetings. So if we can, as Everton said, starting early in terms of not 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, but in terms of getting to grips with this next month, then it'll lay out clear for when we get the other side of the annual council in May, and that's to everybody's benefit, members and officers alike. That's basically what we're trying to achieve, isn't it?
That's correct.
Great. Martin.
I don't say other than it's a brilliant paper. It's one of the thorough papers I've read. I've got to say that I just hope we can implement this and become an even more effective OSC. It's a brilliant paper. I want to thank you. Well, I don't know who wrote it, but whoever the author is, I say this is a brilliant paper. It answers all my questions, and I've just got to say, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wrote it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you, thank you very much.
No, and I think you're quite right to that. I mean, Everton there's a lot of work behind the scenes for this committee that doesn't really get the applause that it deserves, and I'm very grateful for the hard work that Everton put in. And he doesn't just do it for Southwark; he's also does the work for the London Scrutiny Network and London Scrutiny Network too. So, he's got quite a lot on his plate, and he does it diligently and patiently, without too much protest from time to time. He does a tremendous job, and we thank you for that.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, so let's move on to the work programme. You see it's there, item 8. I have a meeting with the Vice Chair next week, Tuesday, I believe. Well, we'll be looking at the rest of our meetings to come. As you can see, the meeting next month is concerning, we're getting the report back on the Canada Estate. There's a Devon Mansions major works, and the electrical testing in council homes, and we're looking at the governance and oversight of the housing services and the strategic responsibility. So we've got a fairly full agenda for that one, and then we'll decide the May agenda next week. Okay. Sorry, Celine.
I've just spotted the rather long list of things to be scheduled. Fair to assume that we may not get through all of these things to be scheduled. And how are we going to prioritise them?
Yes, well, that's the job for myself and the Vice Chair. A lot of these, the reports won't be ready this municipal year, so they wouldn't be considered anyway before May. And some of them might be devolved to the commissions. So Is there anything else you want to say on that, Everton? Just on the work programme? No? Okay, fine. So, yeah, so we try and squeeze in as much as we can, but, you know, we always have an ambitious work programme. Good. Okay, thank you all for coming this evening, and see you in March. Good night.